I would see this as a budget which is not supporting the community, it's actually putting more pressure on the community due to the fact that under the current economic situation of our economies in the world, with the various things rising, and the reasons why we have these projects transferred from last year to this year is because of costs and lack of trades and etc. Yet we're putting more pressure on ourselves and the community to pay for this. So that's why I'm not supporting it, because I think it's too excessive. I think it will exceed the capability and the capacity of this council to deliver this budget. We couldn't deliver last year's budget. There are reasons for that, I understand that. But those situations have not changed, will not change for the next 2 or 3 years, according to the economists, if you read the financial papers and how things operate. There are elements of the plan and within the budget still does not meet the requirements of Section 48 of the LGA Act 99, which is to do with prudential reports and having the right information in place for us to make the informed decisions that we need to be making as a council, especially in this chamber. Also find that the other parts of that is that we're spending money on these projects and the cost of them, and over the years there's been a loss, a huge amounts of money spent on various projects at the time. One of the things I haven't raised under the last time I spoke about in Section 48 of the LGA Act was the enterprise resource. Even though we're doing it over a staging process for 2 or 3 or 4 years, if we look at the total cost, it would exceed the $4 million requirement for a project to be actually addressed by a prudential report. We haven't done that. So this budget doesn't meet the requirements of some of the legislation that I believe is what we haven't done, and also the fact that again, it's just too excessive. When we look at the uniform statements of finances, or uniform presentation of finances, our financial indicators of operating surplus ratio of minus 3.4%, you know, where the target is -2 to 2%, is what we should fall in between. Now, I felt the audit committee, when they recommended to the chamber, to the council, that we adopt these targets, that was a good range to fall into and quite easy to fall into. Yet here we are presenting a budget to our community that's going to be -3.4%. Too far excessive, too great a debt, too much deficit, and I think too much expenditure. And putting on more staff at a cost of 1.3 million or 3.4 FTE equivalents is quite excessive in this climate. We can wait until things settle down into an area where we can actually do a lot of these things. I think we need to show some constraint in this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. You had a couple of questions there, and one of them was how can we deliver with the staffing issues, and I'll ask Katie to answer that. And you also said that we weren't complying with the Local Government Act in relation to prudential reports, and I will ask the Finance Director to speak to that.
Yeah, can I just make a point, please, Mayor? I didn't ask a question, I was making a statement, so they're not questions.
Right, the first one I saw as a question, and I will ask the Director to respond to it, but also I would hate incorrect information to go into the community in relation to us and the Local Government Act and the Prudential reports that you refer to. So I will ask Kelly Knight Stacey to do that, to make sure that all the elected members are clear on their responsibility and what we're doing as a council, and that the community don't get the wrong ideas. So perhaps, Kathy, can you answer that first question about capacity to deliver?
Thank you, through the Mayor. Councillor Kemp, you're right, these are unprecedented times which we don't know what we don't know. In terms of our capacity to deliver, remember that some of the projects that have rolled over into it were always going to be multi-year projects, like the Main Street, like the corporate systems. But we have gone through and we have pulled out, although there's 5 million coming in, we've pulled out nearly $4 million worth of projects to take account of that. What we have also done though, in a lot of those, especially the capital projects, is increased, and projects where there are materials, where there is rubble, where there is steel, where there is all sorts of materials, we've increased the budget by 30% just to give ourselves a safety net, because we know the market dynamics are unprecedented. We don't know what's going to happen. So we have been through and assigned projects, assigned hours, assigned days to get this as best we can and to be able to say, hand on heart, we think we can deliver this. But I agree in the sense that we don't know what the market is going to do. But this is our best informed guess, and we have been over this multiple times now. We, as in our team, the capital and infrastructure team, with the finance team, with the operations team, trying to come up with what we think is realistic.
Thank you. And through Mark Stacey, Director of Finance, if you could respond to the Prudential report query.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, I agree. Prudential reports.
Point of order. Mayor Jenkins, could you please get the statements correct? I didn't make a query, I made a statement. If you want to make a question, you need to refer that as a question from you, not from me. You're putting words in my mouth and misconstruing what I'm saying to the community.
Councillor Kemp, we need to give the correct information to the community, and you have suggested that the council is not adhering to the Local Government Act, and in relation to that, specifically in relation to the Prudential report. I'm asking Kelly Mark Stacey to provide some information about that because I think it's important to our community. I don't accept your point of order, and Kelly Mark Stacey, would you please respond?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, so I agree. Prudential reports are really important, especially for big projects that Council takes on. We haven't had any that meet the requirements of needing a Prudential report since the Aquatic Centre. We did look at it in terms of the corporate systems replacement project to assess whether or not we needed a Prudential report. But the amount of the expenditure in terms of the entire project was less than the 20% that's mentioned in the Act in Section 48 of the previous 5 years' operating expenses, so it didn't meet that requirement. And the capital costs were less than 4 million, so it didn't meet the second part of that Section 48 requirement either. So we did an assessment on that to see whether or not we needed to do a Prudential report, and it was found that it didn't need one. In terms of other projects, over the years there has been significant amounts of money spent on different projects, but they too haven't met the requirement for a Prudential report. So we do it on an ad hoc basis once the budget is being prepared. We have a look at the projects that come in large amounts, noting that with a lot of the big projects, significant portion of the project is usually roads, related to roads or stormwater, and so those costs are excluded from the Prudential report requirements. So we haven't had any that actually meet that criteria to this point. But in particular, going forward, the 3 projects that are particularly large, they will require Prudential reports once we have all the information that's needed to assess, for someone to assess them and do the Prudential report. So a Prudential report basically requires an assessment or evaluation of the Council's long-term financial plans, business cases, feasibility studies, design, concept design, and sometimes detailed design, as well as operational models and things like that. So we will need them for those 3 big projects that are coming up, namely the car park, the arts centre, and the sport and rec precinct. We just don't have all the documents to provide to someone to do a Prudential report yet.
Thank you. You have a question?
I do have a question, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. What about the third option under Section 48? Talks about doing it because it's an appropriate thing to do. You haven't mentioned that one, but that's interesting.
Sorry, what's your question?
The question is that we have undertaken feasibility studies, we have taken business cases, we have done conceptual designs, so why aren't we got Prudential reports already in place to move ahead? We know what these costs are coming, so why we haven't got this now Prudential reports ready? Because we should have had them done earlier than waiting until the Chamber sits to say, do we actually go ahead now to do it or not? So why haven't we done when we've all got that information ready and done over the last couple of years?
So through the Mayor, two things then. You're correct, the Act does allow for Council to do Prudential report if it sees fit. Council hasn't asked us to do a Prudential report on any of those items that have been through the budget. So no Prudential report has been done. One, it didn't trigger it through administration to come to Council, and secondly, Council didn't trigger it through a Council decision. In terms of why we haven't done a Prudential report yet, we do have some of those documents, totally agree, we don't have all of them. And so for someone to do a Prudential report at this stage on any of those three projects, they would be coming back with a recommendation that we do other documentation first, and we'll be paying twice for a Prudential report.
Thank you. Councillor Linda, you want to speak?
I have a question.
You seconded the motion?
Yes, I have a question.
The question?
Yes, I certainly was aware of the need to produce Prudential reports for such projects. My question, and some of it was answered earlier, so thank you for that, Claire, Stacey, with regards to had we reached the point in time that those Prudential reports were required. My question is it the case that this council, admin or leadership, has been cautioned or faced consequences with regards to its requirement to produce a Prudential report on any project?
Through the Mayor, no, we haven't, and it is one of the items that is audited and requested by external auditors each year.
Thank you. We are talking about recommendation 2. Have I got anybody else who wants to speak? Councillor Glazebrook.
I was just wanting to ask a question about the Prudential reports as well. I was just looking at since Councillor Kemp's motion on those, I've been trying to educate myself a little bit on these. It says that the Prudential report should be done before the project begins or something like that. I don't really exact word of that in front of me. I would have thought that we're going to be asking for a planning approval, that definitely the project would have started, in my opinion.
So through the Mayor, that section basically refers to the construction or the council decision to actually proceed to construction. So council needs the advice and the recommendations out of a development application to help support the decision to go ahead and construct. So that's the point where a decision is made to include an amount in the budget for construction. So that would happen basically after full detailed design and everything had been done as well, because how we build it will depend on what operating models we can use and who's in the facility, etc. So it's the timing can be difficult for council in terms of the prep work, but we still need to do that prep work to get to a point where a Prudential report can be done.
Does anybody else want to speak to the motion? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I fully agree with Councillor Kemp in terms of the ambitious nature of this work plan for this year, and I'll come back to that further when we get to the budget. But one of the things that I'd be keen to know is, in terms of the risk assessment that the administration has done on what happens if, for instance, the current impact of COVID infections on the staff keeps going for a significant period of time. For instance, if we haven't, got started on some of these projects, by the second quarter, things like that. Do we have contingencies in place as to what we're going to do in terms of starting projects if we are getting into the business of starting projects in the last quarter of the financial year, which is, if we do that, we're almost certainly in most cases going to end up with projects that become WIPs again, works in progress. Do we have contingencies? Have we worked out what projects that we're going to put on a list that would be, okay, we've reached this point in time in the financial year and we're not We just can't see how we're going to finish that. But like some of those projects that we would then be coming back to the chamber to say, right, we're not going to try and go ahead and do these things. We will recommend that those projects will not be started in this financial year.
And through the Mayor, absolutely, the budget reviews will be the prime period when that information will come to Council. And you know, we've had discussions around how challenging it is at the moment with projects and which ones will be able to be done with material constraints and things like that as well. So we will need to be do very comprehensive budget reviews, especially around the capital works and what can be achieved depending on delays in either contractors or materials. So that will be the prime mechanism that we'll come back to Council with, and we will also be carefully monitoring that through SMT. We do have a look at the projects listing on around a monthly basis to see where things are at. And there will probably be a lot more commentary and communication to elected members about the challenges throughout the year as well.
Thank you. Is there any further commentary? Councillor Glasbrook, I think yours was a question last time.
I'd like to ask another question, if I could please. Manager of Finance again, please. And I really should apologise for not asking this question a couple of weeks ago. I only thought of it this afternoon when I was thinking about this meeting. We presented the very first initial draft to the Audit Committee of this plan, and I believe that at the time we made an undertaking that we would in some way consult them with more of a final draft as we've been presented with this evening. The reason why I asked that question is I personally would have found it helpful to have their opinion. So I don't see that now, but I just thought I would ask that question in relation to trying to achieve this in the future.
Through the Mayor, so the Audit Committee were presented with the copy prior to public consultation. They haven't been provided with this current version, basically because there isn't an Audit Committee meeting at this point in time. We have included in the annual business plan a new section that isn't required until next year, but we've included it to show the variance between public consultation and what we've put to Council tonight. Just to have transparency around the projects and the changes that have been made.
Is there any further discussion? Councillor Mann, Councillor Hales, you haven't spoken. Is there anything that you'd like to say? No. No. Councillor Schofield, did you want to say anything? Or did you want to close the debate?
Happy to do that. Unfortunately, the issues we're facing today won't improve. The sourcing of equipment may improve, the cost won't reduce, it'll only increase. By delaying projects, we only put an imposition on the community in the following years to come. But what I also note that most of the discussion tonight has already been raised previously, and I think 3 or 4 times. I think it's time that we moved on.
Thank you. I now put recommendation 2 to the vote. All those in favour? And those against? That's carried. Thank you for the division. Good timing, Councillor Kemp. We both want a division. All those in favour? Councillor Mann, Councillor Hales, Councillor Littley, and Councillor Schofield. Those against? Councillor Glasbrook, Councillor Kemp, and Councillor Robertson. That motion is carried.
South Coast Television, your community, your voice.